Callista Reed stood on the platform of the Denver train station, clutching a worn leather suitcase in one hand and a folded letter in the other, the letter that had altered the course of her life forever. The autumn wind of 1889 swept through her dark auburn hair, carrying the smell of coal smoke and iron as she gazed down the endless tracks. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the locomotive that would take her to Cedar Ridge, Wyoming, and into a future as uncertain as it was irrevocable. At 26, Callista was stepping into a choice that would scandalize the ladies of Boston drawing rooms. I'd love to hear where you're joining from. Leave a comment. And now, back to our story. She had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, leaving behind the remnants of her old life to marry a man she had never met. To Ezekiel Warren, the rancher who awaited her, she had been nothing more than neat handwriting on elegant stationery, her careful words hiding more than they revealed. He believed he was bringing into his household a woman who could mend his fractured family, a wife who would stand beside him as he raised the 6 orphaned children left in his care. What Ezekiel did not know, what Callista had not dared confess, was the secret that shadowed her steps and had driven her from everything she once held dear. 3 years earlier, her life had crumbled inside a Boston examining room when Dr. Whitmore delivered a verdict that still rang in her mind with unrelenting clarity. "I'm sorry, Miss Reed. The fever left complications that cannot be undone. You'll never bear children." Those words had struck like a blade, severing her from the life she had expected. At the time, she had been engaged to Charles Pelton, a promising young lawyer whose future seemed as neatly mapped as the streets of Beacon Hill. Their wedding had been arranged for the spring of 1887. Invitations already printed, her mother's silk gown altered to perfection. But when Callista, trembling with honesty, told Charles the truth about her barrenness, his rejection was swift and merciless. Within a week, he had dissolved their engagement, claiming incompatibilities to their circle of acquaintances, while privately telling her he required a wife who could give him heirs. The disgrace had nearly undone her. Her mother, Adeline Reed, had taken to her bed with lamentations that the shame might kill her. Her father, Harrison Reed, a stern banker with little patience for weakness, scarcely spoke to her at all. His disappointment lingered in the halls of their Beacon Hill home like a draft that never left. Everywhere Callista went, whispers followed. At church, at social gatherings, even among her pupils at the school where she had taken refuge in teaching. Boston society had a long memory for scandal, and within months she had become invisible, unwanted, a woman marked by failure at her most basic feminine duty. It was Mrs. Adelaide Crowley, the widowed boarding house keeper where Callista had fled, who first held out another possibility. One November evening, she had spread the Rocky Mountain News across the table and tapped a small advertisement with her finger. "Look here, dear," she'd said in her warm, no-nonsense voice. "A rancher out in Wyoming, widowed, raising 6 children alone. He says he needs a good woman, not a pretty ornament. A household kept, little ones tended." Callista had read the words over and over until she knew them by heart. Ezekiel Warren of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming, 34 years old, owner of a cattle ranch, guardian to 6 orphaned children, left parentless after a tragic accident. His plea was plain and unvarnished. He made no mention of expanding his family, no demand for more children of his own, only the urgent need for someone to help raise the ones already entrusted to him. For weeks, Callista had carried that clipping folded neatly in her reticule, taking it out when solitude pressed too close. Finally, with a trembling hand, she had written to Ezekiel. In her letter, she spoke truthfully of her years teaching, of her skill in managing a household, of her heart for children who had known grief. Yet one truth remained unspoken, too heavy for pen and paper: her barrenness. Ezekiel's reply came quickly, steady in its hand, practical in its questions. Could she cook? Could she manage children of different ages? Would she endure the remoteness of ranch life? His words revealed a man worn by responsibility, yet unyielding in his determination to care for those who had no one else. Over the months, their letters grew longer, warmer. He told her of the ranch, 1,500 acres of grassland tucked in a valley between mountains, with a sturdy log house built by his late brother's hands. He wrote of the children, Ella, just 12, already carrying the burdens of a woman. The twins, Michael and Matthew, lively 10-year-olds who tested every limit. Emily, 8, haunted still by nightmares of the influenza that had stolen her parents. Little Emma, 5, who had scarcely spoken a word since her arrival, and baby James, 18 months, toddling through the house like a mischievous sprite, scattering laughter in the shadows of sorrow. Callista found herself drawn into their world through his words. She shared stories of her teaching, advice for calming nightmares and coaxing silence into speech, games to tire restless boys. Ezekiel began to address her not as Miss Reed, but as Dear Callista, and with that small shift, something in her heart softened. He confessed the weight of silence at his table, his fear of failing the children, his loneliness, and she, in turn, bared her own. When his proposal arrived, it was written with the same straightforward honesty that had marked every letter. I believe we could build a life together. The children need you, and I believe I do as well. Will you come? He offered funds for her ticket, asked her to come for a courtship before a final vow was made. Her answer had been yes, though her heart trembled with equal parts hope and dread. She sold what little she had, bought sturdy dresses and boots, and resigned her teaching post. Her mother had wept bitterly, declaring she would be carried off by savages or storms. Her father had turned cold eyes upon her, condemning her choice as folly. Neither offered blessing nor farewell. On the day of her departure, only Mrs. Crowley stood at her side, pressing a small parcel of tea and biscuits into her hands. You're braver than you think, child, she whispered, her wrinkled hand resting over Callista's. That man and those children are blessed already. They just don't know it yet. And so Callista Reed waited on the windswept platform in Denver, a suitcase at her feet, a letter against her heart, and the knowledge that everything behind her had been burned away. Ahead lay only Cedar Ridge, a rancher named Ezekiel Warren, and 6 children who might be her redemption or her undoing. The journey west had stretched over 4 long days, with hurried changes in Chicago and again in Denver. Callista spent the hours caught between books and the window, her gaze drifting over the shifting landscape as familiar forests and farmlands yielded to endless prairies and mountains that clawed at the sky. With every mile she left behind the life she had always known, and with every mile she drew closer to a future that both thrilled and terrified her. Standing now on the platform in Denver, waiting for her final connection to Cedar Ridge, the full weight of her choices pressed against her chest. She was traveling to marry a man she knew only through letters, to step into the role of mother for 6 grieving children, and to carve out a life in a place she had never seen. And she was doing it while carrying a secret that could shatter every fragile hope she carried with her. The shrill whistle of an approaching train cut through her unease. Callista squared her shoulders, lifted her suitcase, and prepared to step onto the locomotive that would deliver her to her fate in the Wyoming mountains. Tucked safely in her reticule, pressed between Ezekiel's letters and her ticket, was the business card of Dr. Whitmore, a small, damning reminder of the truth she would one day be forced to reveal to the man who believed she could give him everything. Steam hissed, brakes screeched, and as the train slowed into the station, Callista whispered a prayer to a God she was no longer certain was listening, for courage, for wisdom, and for the strength to become the woman Ezekiel and his children so desperately needed her to be. Most of all, she prayed that when her truth finally came to light, the love she hoped to build would be strong enough to withstand it. The conductor called out destinations, Cedar Ridge among them, and Callista inhaled the thin mountain air as if tasting the life awaiting her. With her heart pounding, she stepped forward. The train to Cedar Ridge wound through passes that left her breathless with their beauty, even as nerves twisted in her stomach. The car was sparsely filled, a traveling salesman bound for mining towns, an elderly couple going to visit their son, and a severe woman in black who spoke to no one. Callista pressed her cheek to the cool glass, watching pine forests give way to open meadows flecked with cattle, and tried to picture the world she was about to claim as her own. When the conductor finally called Cedar Ridge, her pulse thundered in her ears. The town was smaller than she had dared imagine. A single main street lined with weathered wooden storefronts, a white church steeple rising proudly against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks, and scattered houses humbled by the immensity of the land. Hands trembling, she gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform. There, waiting, was Ezekiel Warren. He was taller than his letters had suggested, with broad shoulders that bore the unmistakable mark of years of labor, and hands roughened by work yet gentle as they closed around her suitcase. His brown hair was threaded with silver, his blue eyes marked by lines of sorrow no man of 34 should already carry. Yet when he smiled, the grief receded, replaced by warmth and sincerity. "Miss Reed, I presume? I'm Ezekiel Warren. Welcome to Cedar Ridge." His voice was deeper than she had expected, touched with the cadence of Southern roots. Callista studied him quickly, searching for the man she had come to know through ink and paper. In his eyes she saw intelligence and patience, and in his manner a strength softened by kindness. "Mr. Warren," she managed, extending her gloved hand. "Thank you for meeting me. The journey was quite an adventure." He chuckled, and the sound eased some of the tension coiled in her chest. "I imagine it was. The railroad only reached Cedar Ridge 2 years back. Before that, you'd have been looking at stagecoach or horseback. You picked the easy road." With practiced ease, he loaded her trunk into the back of a wagon hitched to a pair of steady horses, then offered his hand to help her climb up. As the team set off down the main street, he pointed out the modest landmarks: Morrison's General Store, the small schoolhouse where her teaching might one day be useful, and a trim, whitewashed building with a neat sign. "That's Dr. Helen Blackwood's office," Ezekiel explained. "She came out from Philadelphia 5 years ago. Folks weren't sure about a woman doctor, but she's delivered half the babies in the county and patched up more cowboys than anyone can count." Callista heard the respect in his voice and tucked the detail away. A female doctor thriving in a frontier town suggested Cedar Ridge might hold more possibilities than she had dared hope. The 40-minute drive to the ranch carried them along rutted dirt roads past broad grazing fields. Ezekiel kept the conversation light, pointing out neighbors' properties and small landmarks, his calm manner steadying her nerves, even as her thoughts churned about meeting the children. "They're eager to see you," he said with a smile. "Ella's been cleaning for days, though it was already spotless. The twins have been practicing their manners, though that's more entertaining than successful. Emily drew you something, and Emma picked wildflowers, though she'll never admit it if you ask." The house that rose into view was larger than she had pictured, built of sturdy logs with a wide front porch and flower boxes that still bore traces of a woman's touch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and little faces pressed against the windows as the wagon rumbled to a stop. The door burst open, and the children spilled out. Ella, 12 years old and already carrying herself with a woman's poise, stood with baby James balanced on her hip. Her expression was cautious, curious, her brown hair a mirror of her father's, her eyes holding the sober wisdom of a child who had grown up too fast. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were impossible to tell apart at first glance, sandy-haired, freckle-faced bundles of restless energy. They whispered, bounced on their toes, eyes darting at Callista with a mix of eagerness and uncertainty. 8-year-old Emily lingered near the door, her small frame thin, her blue eyes shadowed with caution. A folded sheet of paper was clutched tight in her hand, and on the porch step sat Emma, 5 years old, braids uneven, a wilting clutch of wildflowers in her lap. Her solemn brown eyes watched Callista with unnerving intensity, though her lips remained closed. Baby James babbled happily, reaching stubby arms toward the newcomer, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. "Children," Ezekiel said gently, his voice strong enough to steady the moment. "This is Miss Callista Reed, the lady I've been telling you about. She's come a long way to meet us." Ella stepped forward first, shifting James and extending her free hand with quiet dignity. "Welcome to our home, Miss Reed. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." The formality pierced Callista's heart. This girl had been running a household when she should have been chasing ribbons and laughter. Callista clasped her hand warmly. "Thank you, Ella. Please, call me Callista. The journey was long, but meeting you makes every mile worthwhile." The twins came next, Michael nudging Matthew forward as spokesman. "We helped Papa fix up the spare room for you," Matthew announced proudly. "And we didn't break anything this week. Well, not much." "Matthew?" Ella scolded, but Callista laughed, the sound genuine for the first time in days. "I appreciate your hard work, boys. I'm sure the room is perfect. Emily crept closer then, clutching her paper, her eyes uncertain. Ezekiel knelt beside her. Didn't you make something special for Miss Callista? Emily gave a small nod, thrust the folded paper forward, and bolted back toward the doorway. Callista opened it carefully, revealing a drawing of a log house surrounded by stick figures holding hands. At the bottom, in painstaking letters, were the words, "Welcome home." The message hit Callista with a force she hadn't anticipated. Home. It was something she had been running from for 3 years, convinced it no longer existed for her. Yet here was this child offering it freely. "This is beautiful, Emily," Callista called softly. "May I keep it? I'd love to hang it in my room." Emily peeked from behind the doorframe, nodded once, and vanished again, though not before a fleeting smile betrayed her. Emma still sat quietly on the steps, her flowers cradled in her lap. Callista knelt down, careful not to intrude. "Those are lovely flowers. Did you pick them yourself?" Emma nodded, silent. Callista waited, remembering from her teaching days that some children needed space more than words. "I had a flower garden back in Boston," she said gently. "Roses and daisies, mostly. But I always thought wildflowers were braver. They bloom wherever they please." Something shifted in Emma's eyes. She looked at the drooping bouquet, then back at Callista, and with sudden resolve offered the flowers forward. Callista accepted them as though they were the rarest jewels. "These are the most beautiful flowers anyone has ever given me." Emma's face split into a brilliant, unguarded smile, and she leapt from the steps to tug at Ezekiel's sleeve, whispering something in his ear as Callista held the flowers close, her throat tight with something that felt dangerously like hope. Whatever Emma whispered made Ezekiel grin and nod with exaggerated seriousness. "Emma says you can stay," he announced to Callista with mock solemnity. "That's high praise from our resident flower expert." The remark broke the last of the tension. Laughter rippled through the group, and suddenly all the children were speaking at once, eager to show Callista their world. Ella took charge of the tour with quiet authority, leading the way into the house. Pride tinged her voice as she gestured toward the kitchen with its large wood-burning stove, the tidy parlor with hand-carved chairs and tables, and the dining room dominated by a long, scarred table set neatly for 7. "Papa made most of the furniture himself," Ella explained, her chin lifting. "Uncle William taught him back when they were boys in Virginia. Papa says working with his hands helps him think." Callista trailed behind, listening carefully, touched by the girl's matter-of-fact pride. The house itself spoke volumes, comfortable and clean, but lacking the gentle touches that revealed a woman's hand. Curtains hung a little crooked, the dishes were mismatched, and everything carried a practical, utilitarian air. She found herself quietly noting 100 small ways she might soften the space, not only for herself, but for all of them. Ezekiel showed her to the guest room, the space that would be hers until their wedding the following Saturday. The room was plain but welcoming, a bed neatly made with a quilt, a washstand, a window looking out toward the mountains. On the dresser sat a small jar of wildflowers, and fresh towels had been folded at the foot of the bed. Ella's handiwork, no doubt. "I know it isn't what you're accustomed to," Ezekiel said softly, his confidence wavering for the first time since she'd met him. Callista turned to him, sincerity clear in her voice. "It's perfect," and she meant it. The room was simple, but it felt like acceptance. Dinner that evening was nothing short of a revelation. Once the children's shyness ebbed, they filled the room with chatter. Michael held forth on horses, proudly reciting the lineage of every animal on the ranch. Matthew, more practical, explained how he'd been helping Ezekiel repair tools and wagons, his eyes alight when speaking of gears and levers. Ella, steady and composed, described her system for keeping household accounts, her records so precise, Callista found herself genuinely impressed. Even Emily, tentative at first, began to share her quiet passion for collecting smooth stones, explaining in careful sentences where she had found each one and why it was special. Emma remained reserved, her voice nearly absent, but her eyes followed everything with sharp attention. Occasionally, she whispered something to Ezekiel, and his smile always softened when he bent his head to listen. Baby James, blissfully unconcerned with such matters, provided entertainment by flinging bits of food onto the floor and laughing at himself. Ezekiel surprised her too. He was well-read, thoughtful, and keenly interested in her opinions on everything from literature to politics. He asked about her teaching with genuine curiosity, listening as though every suggestion for the children's schooling mattered to him deeply. When the meal ended and the children were ushered off to bed, Callista and Ezekiel lingered on the porch beneath a sky spilling with stars. The silence between them was companionable, the kind that needed no filling. "They're wonderful children," Callista said at last, her voice quiet. "You've done an extraordinary job with them, Ezekiel." For a moment he didn't answer. His hands were clasped tightly, his gaze fixed on the dark expanse of land stretching into shadow. "I've tried, but most days I feel like I'm drowning. Ella is growing up too fast, taking on burdens she shouldn't. The twins, they need more guidance than I always know how to give. Emily still wakes screaming from nightmares. And Emma," his voice caught, and he swallowed hard. "Emma hasn't spoken a full sentence in 2 years. Not since the day they came here, except for what she whispered to me about you today." The raw weight of his words broke something in Callista. She saw then not only the man, but the father who had poured every ounce of himself into holding a family together while fearing he was failing them. "They adore you," she said firmly. "Anyone can see it. They're healing, Ezekiel." "It takes time. I pray you're right," he murmured. "I just want to give them the home they deserve." Later, in her small room, Callista replayed the day in her mind. The children had been everything Ezekiel promised. Bright, resilient, loving, and he himself was more than she could have dared to hope. A man of integrity, patient and steadfast, one who carried his family's burdens with quiet strength. And yet her secret loomed larger than ever. As she brushed out her hair and folded herself beneath the quilt, the knowledge pressed against her chest until she could scarcely breathe. These children had already lost so much. Ezekiel valued family above all else. What would he say when he learned that she could never give him more children, never fulfill the most basic expectation of a frontier wife? She stared at the ceiling long into the night, the sounds of the house settling around her, cattle lowing in the distance. Tomorrow would be the beginning of her life with this family, but the shadow of truth crept closer with each day. The next morning dawned with the crowing of roosters and the sound of boots on the floor below. Callista rose quickly, dressed, and slipped downstairs. Ezekiel was already at the stove, pouring coffee, while Ella managed breakfast with soldierly precision. "Good morning," Callista said softly, not wanting to startle them. "May I help?" Ella glanced up from the griddle. "Oh, Miss Reed, you don't have to." "I'd like to," Callista interrupted gently. "And I meant what I said yesterday. Call me Callista." Ezekiel handed her a cup of steaming coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Ella's been running this kitchen since she was 12, but I imagine she'd appreciate the help." And she did. Slowly, Ella began to let Callista in until they moved almost seamlessly together. Callista setting the table, arranging ingredients, offering suggestions that eased the process without stepping on the girl's authority. By the time the twins thundered down the stairs, Emily had drifted in with her doll. Emma appeared with a fresh clutch of wildflowers, and baby James toddled in, hair sticking up every which way. Breakfast was a riot of laughter and noise. The twins argued about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Emily whispered lessons in table manners to her doll. Emma solemnly arranged her flowers in a cup of water. James flung food. Through it all, Ezekiel mediated with calm patience, steady and unflappable. "Miss Callista," Michael blurted suddenly between bites, "Papa says you're a real teacher. Did you ever have a kid throw spitballs at you?" "Michael," Ella scolded, but Callista only laughed. "Yes, I had a few. The trick is keeping them so interested they forget about mischief." "What's the most interesting thing you ever taught?" Matthew piped up, eyes bright. Callista thought for a moment. "Astronomy. I once had my students map the night sky. Every clear night for a month, we went outside, charted the stars, and learned the old stories people told about them. By the end, they could find any constellation you named." The children sat rapt, even Emma putting down her fork to listen. Emily, her voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Could you teach us?" "I'd love to," Callista replied warmly. "If the sky is clear tonight, we'll start with the brightest constellations." Ezekiel's gaze lingered on her across the table, something thoughtful and quietly hopeful in his eyes. The day unfolded with its share of challenges and satisfactions. Ezekiel took the twins to work alongside him, while Ella tackled the endless laundry. Callista slipped easily into the rhythm of household life, caring for James, helping Emily, finding joy in tasks that demanded her hands and kept her mind from wandering too far. Emma remained her small, silent shadow, speaking in whispers or gestures, but drawing closer with each passing hour. She hummed softly when Callista sang, her thin voice blending perfectly in tune. Emily, too, warmed to her, proudly displaying her collection of stones, describing each one with unexpected perception, a child's curiosity paired with the soul of an artist. By the time the sun dipped low, Callista felt she was no longer an outsider stepping into their lives, but the beginnings of something more, a part of the family. That evening, true to her promise, Callista led the children outside after supper to gaze upon the night sky. Away from the clutter of city lights, the heavens stretched endlessly above them, jeweled with stars so vivid and innumerable that she caught her breath. With gentle enthusiasm, she traced constellations in the air, pointing out the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, and Orion. Her voice softened as she wove myth into memory. The ancient Greeks believed Orion was a great hunter, she told them, her finger lifting to mark the 3 stars that formed his belt. They said no creature on earth could escape his skill, but pride has a way of drawing the wrong attention. The gods sent a scorpion to humble him, and so Orion and Scorpius chase each other across the sky for all eternity, never able to share it at the same time. Emily's brow furrowed as she studied the stars. "That's sad," she said at last. "They could have been friends instead of enemies." "You're absolutely right," Callista replied warmly. "It shows how pride and stubbornness can turn potential allies into adversaries." Ezekiel joined them then, settling into a chair on the porch while the children stretched across blankets on the boards, their chatter fading into drowsy silence. In the cool darkness, with the vast dome of the heavens above and the steady chorus of crickets in the grass, Callista felt a peace settle deep within her bones, something she had not known for years. "You're a natural teacher," Ezekiel said after a time, his voice low and thoughtful as his gaze lingered on her. "They've learned more in one evening than in months of my scattered lessons." "They're bright children," she answered softly. "They only need someone to nurture that curiosity." His eyes held hers. "Is that what you miss most about teaching, the chance to open young minds?" Callista considered, her heart tugging at old memories. "I miss that moment when you see understanding dawn in a child's eyes, that spark when they realize they're capable of more than they ever imagined. There's nothing quite like it." Ezekiel fell silent, his expression shadowed by the weight of care. "These children have endured more than any young soul should. Some days I wonder if I'm giving them enough, if I'm helping them heal, or only holding them back." "You're doing more than enough," Callista replied with quiet conviction. "You've given them safety, love, and stability. Everything else will follow in time." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and new. Callista slipped easily into the life of the household, her skills as a teacher proving invaluable. With Ella, she explored advanced mathematics and literature. With the twins, she coaxed their restless energy into focus, helping them with reading and penmanship. With Emily, she offered gentle patience, slowly guiding her to put thoughts on paper without fear. Ella, though still quiet, light, surprised Callista with her small tokens of affection. A perfect leaf, a polished stone, a feather she'd found near the barn. Each gift was given with shy ceremony, and Callista accepted them as though they were treasures. Even little James toddled after her constantly, his hands reaching, his babbling, a cheerful accompaniment to her daily tasks. She found herself humming as she worked, and sometimes to her quiet joy, Ella would hum along in soft harmony. Soon, wedding preparations overtook the household. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, the minister's wife and Cedar Ridge's self-appointed guardian of etiquette, arrived like a whirlwind, her arms laden with fabric samples and her tongue sharp with opinions. "My dear," she said, pinning cloth at Callista's waist with brisk efficiency, "you may be from the city, but here we do things simply. A dress fit for church and special occasions afterward, nothing too fine. No sense making the other ladies feel inadequate." Callista couldn't help but smile at the woman's frank practicality. Within hours, Mrs. Fletcher had orchestrated the ceremony, the reception, and every detail in between. As she worked, the older woman confided, her voice dropping to something more intimate. Ezekiel Warren is among the finest men in this territory. Lost his wife in childbirth 5 years ago, tragic business. And when his brother Harrison and sister-in-law Catherine were taken in that influenza outbreak, Ezekiel stepped forward without hesitation. 6 children all at once, and not a complaint from him. Not many men would do such a thing. The words struck Callista like a blow. She had not known, at least not fully, that Ezekiel had once had a wife of his own, lost along with their child. The weight of her secret pressed heavier against her heart. How could she confess to this man who had already borne so much sorrow that she could never give him children? That evening, as twilight deepened into night, she found Ezekiel, as she often did, sitting on the porch, his gaze lifted toward the stars. She joined him, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Fletcher told me you were married before," she began softly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." He was quiet for a long time, his hands clasped together. "Her name was Catherine, kind, gentle. We had 3 good years together." His voice steadied, though the pain was still there beneath it. "The baby came early. Complications. Dr. Morrison tried all he could, but we didn't have real medical knowledge back then. Catherine and the baby both passed within hours." "I'm so sorry," Callista whispered, her throat tight. "For years, I thought I'd never marry again," he continued. "Grief near consumed me. But when Harrison and Catherine were taken, and the children had no one, I realized my pain wasn't the only burden. They needed someone steady. They'd lost enough. What they needed was a home, a father, a family." His words tore at her conscience. She opened her mouth, ready to confess the truth that haunted her, but the words refused to come. How could she add to his losses? How could she shatter the fragile hope that had begun to grow in this household? Instead, Ezekiel turned to her, his face open, earnest. "I don't expect this marriage to be a fairy tale, Callista. We're both practical folk, and I know we're entering a partnership as much as anything else. But I hope that, in time, we might find companionship, perhaps even affection." Her heart ached at the simplicity and honesty of his offer. He was giving her everything she had longed for: acceptance, belonging, the chance to be part of a family. And yet, all of it was built on a lie. "I hope so, too," she managed to say, though the words tasted of ash. The day before the wedding dawned bright and filled with motion. Callista's gown, a deep blue wool that made her eyes seem to glow, was finished at last. Ella carefully arranged her hair, the twins practiced their duties as eager ushers, and Emily rehearsed her polite curtsy for the ladies of the town. Ella presented Callista with a bouquet of wildflowers, her small hands clutching it with quiet pride, while little James toddled about underfoot, laughing at the bustle. Dr. Helen Blackwood, the town's respected physician, stopped by to introduce herself. Over tea, she shared her story of leaving Boston to practice medicine in the West. "Back east," she said with a confident smile, "I'd have spent my life fighting for the right to practice. Out here, no one questions whether a doctor wears skirts or trousers, only whether she can save a life. Necessity matters more than convention." Her words struck Callista with a sense of kinship. Perhaps here, too, she might find freedom from Boston's stifling expectations. Perhaps here she might build a life that was not defined by what she lacked. And yet, as the sun dipped low on the eve of her wedding, she stood at her bedroom window, looking out over the land that would soon be hers to call home. The children were full of excitement. Ezekiel was patient and kind, and the community had embraced her without reservation. By all outward measure, it was perfect. But the secret she carried pressed like iron against her chest. Tomorrow she would stand before God and community as Mrs. Ezekiel Warren, stepmother to 6 children, partner to a man who had already endured more loss than most could bear. And she would do so knowing that the truth, when it came, might undo everything. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for escape, but for strength. Strength to love them as they deserved. Strength to endure the day her secret could no longer remain hidden. And strength to believe that love, once rooted, might survive even the hardest truth. The morning of the wedding broke crisp and clear, the first rays of autumn sun spilling through Callista Reed's window and laying golden squares across the worn wooden floor. Sleep had barely touched her, chased away by anticipation and by the weight pressing steadily against her chest. By the day's end, she would be Callista Warren, wife to Ezekiel, And though her heart wanted to soar at the thought, the secret she carried felt heavier than stone. A soft knock came just as the clock struck 7. Ella slipped inside, balancing a tray of breakfast with all the solemn importance of a maid of honor. At 12, her wide eyes brimmed with excitement. "You've got to eat," she insisted earnestly. "Mrs. Fletcher says brides who don't eat faint in the middle of the ceremony, and that would be simply awful." Callista managed a tired smile at the child's tender concern. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're taking very good care of me." As she pushed at her eggs and toast, Ella chattered about the bustling house. The twins had been awake since dawn, polishing their boots and bickering over which hairstyle looked less ridiculous. Emily had been giggling for hours, practicing her curtsy over and over again, while Emma had disappeared entirely, likely crouched in her favorite hiding spot by the kitchen stove, clutching her newest collection of odds and ends. "Papa's been pacing the porch since sunrise," Ella confided, lowering her voice as though sharing a scandal. "He keeps checking his watch and muttering about whether the minister will show up on time. I think he's more nervous than you." The image of Ezekiel pacing the porch made Callista smile in spite of herself. Somehow it comforted her to know he wasn't sailing smoothly through the morning either. By 9 o'clock, Mrs. Fletcher descended upon her chamber like a general readying her troops, armed with pins, combs, curling irons, and brisk determination. She set about transforming Callista from an ordinary woman into a bride. "We'll keep it fashionable, dear," she announced as her hands worked with sharp efficiency, "but nothing too grand for Cedar Ridge. Lovely, but not heirs." Soon other women arrived bearing their own small treasures. Mrs. Morrison from the general store presented a delicate pearl necklace once belonging to her grandmother. Miss Cooper, the schoolteacher, laid out elegant gloves to match the blue wool dress. Even Dr. Blackwood came with roses from her garden, blooms that had braved frost, as resilient as any frontier woman. Their kindness nearly undid Callista. In Boston, after her broken engagement, her circle had shrunk to silence. But here she was being embraced into a community that knew little of her, yet offered her genuine warmth. By noon, the mirror reflected a stranger who still felt like herself, hair pinned in a simple, graceful style, pearl pins catching the light, the rich blue dress deepening the green in her hazel eyes. With Mrs. Morrison's necklace at her throat and Dr. Blackwood's roses in her hands, she felt at once radiant and burdened by the lie she had yet to confess. "You're beautiful," Ella breathed, reverence softening her young face. "Papa's going to be so happy." The words struck Callista with a sharp pang. The child's innocent faith made her deception feel crueler still. By mid-afternoon, the parlor was ready, Reverend Fletcher waiting to begin. But at 1:45, a quiet knock drew her to the door. Ezekiel stood in the hall, uncomfortable in his best suit, fidgeting with his hat. His hair bore the signs of repeated taming, stubborn as always. "You look," he faltered, then steadied. "You look beautiful, Callista. Truly." Her heart clenched at the gentleness in his tone. "I wanted to give you this," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Inside lay a gold locket, its tiny flowers engraved with loving detail, the clasp opening to reveal a miniature photograph of a woman with Ezekiel's same steady eyes. "It belonged to my mother," he explained softly. "She told me to save it for the woman I married." Callista's breath caught. "Are you certain you want me to have it?" "I can't think of anyone who would honor her memory more," he murmured. He fastened it at her throat himself, his fingers grazing her skin, the weight of the keepsake pressing against her heart. She opened her mouth then, desperate to confess, but Matthew's voice rang up the stairs, calling them to begin. The moment slipped away. Later, she told herself. Later, when they were alone, she would speak the truth. The parlor glowed with lamplight and care. Neighbors and friends filled the chairs Mrs. Fletcher had arranged, their faces kind, expectant. The children were scrubbed and restless, Emma clutching her bouquet as though it were treasure, Emily balancing her lucky stones on her lap. Ella held baby James, who, for once, remained calm, blinking at the room as if he understood the importance. Ezekiel stood steady at the front, nerves now replaced with quiet resolve. Callista entered on Mrs. Fletcher's arm, and though murmurs rippled softly at her appearance, her gaze locked only on him. His joy shone so unguarded it ached to look at him. The words of the ceremony were simple, chosen with care for the family they were forming. Ezekiel spoke his vows clearly, promising to cherish and protect, and when it was Callista's turn, the words felt as if they were tearing themselves from her very soul. She promised to stand by him, to care for his children as her own, to love him with all her heart. And as the words left her lips, she knew they were true. Despite the secret, despite the falsehood that had brought her here, she did love him. She loved his strength and kindness, his children's laughter and tears, even the weight of responsibility that bound them together. Reverend Fletcher's voice rang out, solemn and certain. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ezekiel's hands cradled her face, and when his lips met hers, the kiss was tender and full of promise. It was the kiss of a man who meant every vow he had spoken. And in that moment, Callista's love and her lie entwined so tightly she could no longer tell them apart. When their lips finally parted, Callista Reed saw the reflection of her own emotions shining in Ezekiel Warren's eyes. Love, devotion, and the unwavering determination to build something beautiful together. Applause erupted through the parlor, breaking the spell. The children rushed forward to embrace their new stepmother, while friends and neighbors crowded in with handshakes, hugs, and warm words of congratulations. Mrs. Fletcher, ever efficient, was already barking cheerful orders as she orchestrated the reception. Even as joy swelled around her, Callista carried within her a sharp ache of isolation. The celebration felt like a blessing and a curse, for beneath her new vows lay a secret that bound her heart in chains. The reception spilled onto the front porch, where tables bowed beneath the weight of dishes offered by generous townsfolk. There was roasted chicken from the Morrisons, baskets of fresh bread from the bakery, vegetables gathered from kitchen gardens, and a towering cake that Mrs. Hooper had somehow conjured despite the scarcity of frontier baking supplies. The scent of it all, savory, sweet, and warm, carried on the crisp mountain air, mingling with the hum of laughter and conversation. The women of Cedar Ridge surrounded Callista one by one, offering embraces and words of welcome. They spoke of the peculiar challenges of life at altitude, the best remedies for childhood fevers, and tricks to keep a household running smoothly through long winters. Their warmth and acceptance struck Callista like a balm. She was not only gaining a husband and children, but also a network of capable, strong women who were already drawing her into their fold. During a rare, quiet moment, Dr. Blackwood drew her aside, eyes soft yet keen. "Mrs. Warren," she said gently, "I hope you'll remember that my door is open. Whether the matter is medical or otherwise, sometimes it helps to have another woman to confide in when adjusting to new life." The kindness in her tone was genuine, yet Callista's stomach tightened. The doctor's intelligence was undeniable, her insight dangerous. Would it only be a matter of time before she uncovered the truth that Callista had worked so hard to hide? Meanwhile, Ezekiel moved easily among the guests, accepting their congratulations with quiet confidence. He carried himself like a man who believed the day had unfolded exactly as it should. The children, basking in attention, hovered near either him or Callista, as though needing constant reassurance that this new happiness was real and lasting. It was little Ella who surprised everyone most. She approached Mrs. Morrison directly and with clear, steady voice announced, "Callista is my mama now. Does that mean I can have a piece of cake?" The simple declaration drew tears from more than one eye, marking a tender milestone in the child's journey back to trust. Emily shyly pressed a small treasure into Callista's hand, a smooth piece of quartz streaked with a vein of gold. "It's for luck," she said solemnly, "for our family." The twins, giddy with excitement, could not be contained. They chattered endlessly to anyone who would listen about all the adventures they now planned with their new stepmother, camping trips, fishing expeditions, and elaborate building projects around the ranch. Ella, with her quiet diligence, helped manage the practical details of the reception, ensuring food was served, guests were comfortable, and the younger children were kept in check. Yet even she stole moments to laugh at the twins' antics or sneak extra bites of cake when she thought no one was watching. As dusk drew near and the guests drifted homeward, Callista busied herself with cleaning, all the while steeling her heart for what lay ahead. She would move her few belongings into Ezekiel's room that night. Husband and wife, partners, a family at last. Yet as she folded linens and stacked dishes, The weight of her secret pressed heavily on her chest. She was now bound by law and love to a man who deserved only truth, surrounded by children who looked to her as their mother. It took twice the usual effort to settle the little ones to bed, their excitement delaying sleep. Each goodnight hug felt both like a blessing and an unspoken accusation. When baby James nestled into her arms, pressing his cheek against her shoulder, she had to bite her lip hard to hold back tears. Finally, silence fell over the house. Alone again with Ezekiel in the same parlor where they had spoken their vows only hours earlier, Callista felt the enormity of their union enfold her like a living thing. "It was a beautiful day," Ezekiel said softly, his fingers closing warmly around hers. "Thank you for making it perfect." Callista squeezed his hand, her heart thundering with the knowledge that this peace was borrowed time. She would have to find the courage soon to tell him the truth, the reason she had truly come to Cedar Ridge. Her only prayer was that the fragile love they were building would prove strong enough to withstand the revelation that their marriage had been founded on a lie. 3 weeks later, Callista had adapted to the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. The pre-dawn rituals became habit. Coffee brewing, breakfast sizzling, lunches packed for Ezekiel and the older children. Her background as a teacher served her well in bringing order to the household chaos, and she found deep satisfaction in the quiet harmony she was cultivating. The children had embraced her fully. Ella, relieved of her former burden as caretaker, was beginning to act more like a 12-year-old than a weary stand-in mother. The twins trailed Callista everywhere, eager to help and constantly seeking her approval. Emily, once so guarded, had opened her heart, sharing dreams and fears that made Callista's own chest ache with tenderness. Little Emma whispered, "Mama Callista," when she thought no one else could hear, and James could not bear to be parted from her for more than a few minutes. And yet, this very closeness poisoned her nights. Every embrace, every word of trust, every fragile step toward healing was tainted by the knowledge of her deception. Often she lay awake beside Ezekiel, staring into the darkness, suffocated by the truth she dared not speak. The reckoning came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Callista was in the kitchen with Emily, teaching her how to knead bread, when the crunch of wheels on gravel drew her gaze to the window. A buggy had stopped outside. Dr. Blackwood stepped down, medical bag in hand, her expression grave. "Mrs. Warren?" the doctor called as she mounted the steps. "I need a word with you concerning a medical matter in the family." Callista's blood chilled. Had the doctor discovered her secret at last? With trembling hands, she brushed flour from her fingers and stepped onto the porch. "Dr. Blackwood," she managed, "what brings you out this morning? Is someone unwell?" "Not exactly," the doctor replied, her eyes sharp with concern. "I've received word from the Territorial Health Office in Cheyenne. Several cases of scarlet fever have been reported in the mining camps east of here." "3 children have already died," Dr. Blackwood said gravely, "and the authorities fear it may spread to the surrounding communities." Relief washed over Callista Reed so suddenly she had to grip the porch railing to steady herself. The doctor's visit had nothing to do with her secret. It was about safeguarding the children. "What do we need to do?" she asked at once, her protective instincts overriding her fear. "I'm visiting all the families with children to discuss prevention measures," Dr. Blackwood explained. "Scarlet fever is highly contagious and dangerous, especially for little ones. I'll need to examine all 6 of yours, then go over the signs to watch for." Callista quickly called the children in from their chores, and soon the parlor was transformed into an impromptu clinic. One by one, Dr. Blackwood examined each child, peering down throats, listening to breathing, asking questions about recent colds or fevers. The room held its breath until, at last, the doctor straightened with a small smile. "They're all in excellent health," she announced. "You're caring for them wonderfully, Mrs. Warren. Their nutrition is sound, they're thriving, and it shows." The words should have warmed Callista, but instead guilt gnawed at her. Praise only sharpened the weight of her deception. Dr. Blackwood gave careful instructions about fever, sore throat, and the telltale rash, leaving written notes and promising to return weekly until the danger had passed. At the door, she paused, studying Callista thoughtfully. "You know," she said with a warm smile, "you have such a natural way with children. Motherhood comes easily to you. I imagine you and Mr. Warren will be expanding your family before long." The remark struck Callista like a blow to the chest. She forced a nod, murmured something polite, and held herself together until the buggy disappeared down the road. Then she fled to the barn, where her composure shattered. Sobs racked her body as she crumpled into the hay, mourning the children she could never bear, the lies she was tangled in, and the moment she knew must come when the truth would destroy everything. "Callista?" Ezekiel's voice came softly from the doorway. She looked up, his figure silhouetted against the light, concern etched on his face. His kindness undid her, and when he came to her side, kneeling in the straw to gather her into his arms, she nearly confessed everything. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I don't know what's wrong with me. Dr. Blackwood's visit just reminded me how much the children mean to me, and the thought of losing them." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He stroked her hair, murmuring soothing words. "You love them so much," he whispered. "I see it every day. You were meant to be part of this family." The tenderness in his voice cut deeper than any reproach. Callista pulled back, memorizing his face in this fragile moment of peace before it shattered. "Ezekiel," she began, barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before we married." His expression sobered instantly. He took her hands. "What is it? Whatever it is, we'll face it together." She opened her mouth. "Mama Callista! Mama Callista!" Emma's voice rang shrill across the yard. "Come quick, James is being sick!" The moment collapsed. Ezekiel and Callista leapt to their feet and ran. They found baby James burning with fever in Ella's arms, his small body limp, face flushed. Dr. Blackwood's warnings echoed like thunder in Callista's mind. "How long has he been like this?" Ezekiel demanded. "He was fine at lunch," Ella said, her composure cracking. "But after his nap, he started crying. He was so hot." "Ella, fetch Dr. Blackwood," Callista ordered. "Ezekiel, we need to cool him and keep the others away." The next hours blurred in frantic motion. Dr. Blackwood returned swiftly, examined James with practiced care, and at last pronounced, "It's not scarlet fever." Relief broke over them like a tide. A simple childhood fever, likely teething and a minor infection. Fluids, rest, close watch, and he'll recover. Callista devoted herself to the sick child as though her very soul depended on it. Through long nights, she sat beside his bed, laying cool cloths on his brow, coaxing water to his lips, humming lullabies when he whimpered. Ezekiel kept vigil by turns, and together they nursed him through the worst. By the third day, James's fever broke. He laughed weakly as he stacked wooden blocks, reaching for Callista with chubby arms that no longer burned. She held him close, her heart aching with fierce triumph. "You were magnificent," Ezekiel told her quietly, watching her cradle the child. "The way you cared for him, calm and steady. You're a natural mother, Callista. This family is blessed to have you." The praise twisted inside her, turning to poison. What should have been joy only deepened her torment. That night, with the children asleep and James resting peacefully, Ezekiel raised the question that had haunted her since the barn. "You started to tell me something that day," he said as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Something important. I've been waiting." Her hands trembled in her lap. The time for concealment had run out. "Yes," she whispered. "There is something I should have told you before we married." He reached for her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. I love you, Callista. Nothing will change that." His faith, his trust, made what she had to confess all the more agonizing. She drew a shuddering breath. "Ezekiel, the reason I left Boston wasn't only scandal or a broken engagement. 3 years ago, I nearly died from fever. The doctors saved me, but it left permanent damage. I can't." Her throat closed, forcing her to force the words out. "I can't bear children. Ever." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Ezekiel's face was unreadable as the truth settled between them. "You've known all this time?" His voice was steady, controlled. "Yes. Since before I answered your letter, I knew, and I was terrified you'd never want me if you knew. I'm so sorry, Ezekiel. Every day it grew harder to speak the truth, and I was afraid of losing you, losing them." He rose and turned to the window, shoulders taut, staring into the darkness. Callista's breath came in shallow bursts as she braced for anger, for rejection. At last he spoke, his voice low. "All this time you carried that weight alone. I tried to tell you," she whispered brokenly. "I should have, but I couldn't bear the thought of walking away." He turned, and what she saw on his face was not fury, but sorrow. Callista, he said softly, do you think so little of me? Did you truly believe I married you only for more children, that your worth begins and ends in your ability to bear them? His words staggered her. This was not the reaction she had dreaded. I don't understand, she whispered. Ezekiel came back to her side, his gaze steady. I already have 6 children, 6 who were hurting and in need of love when you came, and who are thriving now because of you. Why would I need more when these fill our lives so completely? Her voice broke, but voice broke. Men want heirs. I'm not most men, he replied firmly. These children are my heirs in every way that matters. They will inherit my name, this land, this life we've built, and they are enough. Something inside her cracked open, a knot of fear and shame loosening after 3 long years. You're not angry? Ezekiel was quiet, choosing his words with care. I'm hurt you didn't trust me sooner, sad that you carried this alone. But angry? No, Callista. Never angry. Callista's tears fell freely, her voice breaking as she whispered, I was so afraid. The confession slipped out like a wound reopening, raw and trembling. In Boston, when my fiancé discovered the truth, he cast me aside as if I were damaged goods. I thought all men would see me the same way. Ezekiel's expression softened, his voice steady with quiet conviction. Then your former fiancé was a fool. Any man who would throw away a woman as capable and loving as you over something beyond your control doesn't deserve to have you in his life. For the first time in 3 long years, the weight of shame that had pressed on Callista's shoulders began to lift. She looked at Ezekiel, really looked at him, and saw nothing in his eyes but love and acceptance. Her heart twisted, both relieved and aching all at once. Can you forgive me, she asked, her voice small, for not trusting you with the truth sooner? He reached for her hands and covered them with his own, warm and steady. There's nothing to forgive, Callista. From the moment you arrived, you've been the answer to our prayers. You brought healing to my children, joy to this home, and love to my heart. That you cannot bear children changes none of that. She fell into his arms then, sobbing with a storm of gratitude and release. At last, the burden she had carried alone since Dr. Whitmore's devastating diagnosis was gone. For the first time since that cruel day, she felt whole. She felt worthy of love. And as Ezekiel whispered comfort into her hair, Callista knew she had found the miracle she had never dared to hope for. A man who loved her for who she was, and a family who needed her exactly as she needed them. The weeks that followed her confession brought a subtle but profound transformation to the Reed household. With her secret finally laid bare, Callista stepped fully into her role as wife and mother. The anxious watchfulness that had haunted her since she first arrived gave way to peace and purpose. She belonged here, not because of what she could give, but because of who she was. The children felt the shift almost instantly. Ella, at 12, began to seek Callista out with questions far beyond chores and lessons. She confided in her about the confusing changes of growing older, her dreams of teaching, her doubts and curiosities about the future. They often talked while kneading dough in the kitchen or weeding side by side in the garden, conversations that wove a deep bond between them. One afternoon, as they stood over a table heaped with apples for preserving, Ella looked up with hopeful eyes. Do you think I could ever become a teacher like you were? Mrs. Cooper says I explain things well to the little ones. I think I'd love it. Callista paused, warmth swelling in her chest. I think you would make a wonderful teacher, Ella. You have patience, intelligence, and a way of guiding others gently. That's rarer than you know. But would Papa approve? Ella's brow furrowed. He's put so much into the ranch. I know he expects me to help run it. Your father wants you to be fulfilled, Callista said firmly. Teaching wouldn't take you away from the ranch. Many women balance both. Let's talk to him together. I think you might be surprised by his answer. The twins, full of mischief and imagination, had taken Callista into their endless schemes as though she'd always been part of them. They dragged her to see their precarious treehouse that swayed alarmingly in the wind, proudly sketched out blueprints for inventions that defied logic, and insisted she weigh in on every new plan. Mama Callista, Michael announced one morning at breakfast with great seriousness, we've decided you need to learn to ride properly. Buttercup's too tame. You need to ride Thunder. Thunder, Ezekiel's spirited stallion, was hardly a horse for a novice. Callista caught Ezekiel's eye across the table and saw the laughter he tried and failed to hide. I think Buttercup and I make a fine pair, Callista replied with practiced diplomacy. But how will you help us round up cattle in spring? Matthew countered, if you can't handle a real horse. The assumption that she would be out on the range with them nearly undid her. To the boys, she was not a stepmother hovering at the edges of their lives, but a partner expected to shoulder the work and joys of the family alongside them. Emily, shy and thoughtful, had begun to blossom under Callista's encouragement. She spent hours sketching the wildlife around the ranch, capturing details with a precision that astonished. One evening, she presented a drawing of the sunset over the mountains. I tried to do it the way you showed me, she said softly. How the colors change when the light shifts. The drawing took Callista's breath away. The lines, the shades of gold melting into violet, carried more than skill. They held feeling. This is extraordinary. You've caught something even seasoned artists strive for. We must get you proper supplies. You have a real gift. The girl's face glowed, and she whispered, I want to make a whole book of the ranch through the seasons. Emma, once nearly silent, now bubbled with questions and observations, shadowing Callista everywhere. One morning, as they gathered eggs, she asked in all seriousness, Do you think chickens dream? Sometimes they peep in their sleep like they're talking. Callista smiled. I think they dream of flying higher than they can when they're awake, or finding the juiciest bugs. Emma's eyes sparkled. I think they dream of being beautiful birds with tails that shine like jewels. Callista tucked that thought away, recognizing the child's longing to feel beautiful, and admired herself. Little James had become her constant shadow, his tiny voice calling out variations of "Mama" whenever she stepped away. His trust and affection filled a hollow place in her heart she hadn't known, still ached. Ezekiel watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as relief, when Callista confessed, had deepened into something greater, a gratitude that went beyond words. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the golden light soft on the fields, he said, I never thought it could be like this. Callista turned her face toward him. Like what? This feeling of wholeness, he said after a pause. When Catherine died, I thought my chance at family joy had gone with her. When William and Catherine passed, leaving me 6 children to raise, I thought only of survival. But with you here, it's more than I hoped for. Callista reached for his hand, their fingers twining with a quiet familiarity. They were already wonderful children, Ezekiel. They only needed to heal, to believe again. They needed a mother, he said simply. And I needed a partner. I thank God every day you answered my advertisement, even with all you carried. Her heart swelled, though the moment was interrupted by a wild commotion from the yard, the twins shouting, Emily and Emma shrieking with laughter, Ella calling warnings as she balanced James on her hip. I should probably intervene before someone gets hurt, Callista said with a rueful smile. But she made no move to rise. Ezekiel only chuckled, his gaze lingering on her with the kind of steady affection that made her believe, at last, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The evening had settled soft and quiet around the Warren homestead, the kind of stillness that came so rarely with 6 children underfoot. Ezekiel sat close beside Callista, his hand wrapped warmly around hers. They're fine, he reassured her when she cast a questioning glance toward the barn, where the echoes of laughter drifted through the open window. Ella has everything under control. They need to burn off some energy before bed. Besides, his thumb brushed her knuckles, I'm enjoying this rare moment of peace with my wife. That single word, wife, still sent a ripple of wonder through Callista. After 3 long years of believing she would never truly belong to anyone or anywhere, she had found both a home and a man who valued her just as she was. The comfort of that thought lingered until the sound of pounding hooves shattered the quiet. Out of the fading dusk, young Billy Morrison came hard on his horse, dust flying from the trail. His face was pale, his urgency plain as he pulled up before the porch. Mr. Warren, Mrs. Warren, he called breathlessly. Dr. Blackwood sent me. There's been a cave-in at the Morrison mine. 3 men are trapped, and she needs every hand she can get. Ezekiel was already rising to his feet. How bad is it, Billy? Bad enough the doctor's asking for anyone with steady hands or medical training. She said I was to tell Mrs. Warren she could use another woman who keeps her head in a crisis. A surge of pride rushed through Callista. That Dr. Blackwood had thought of her spoke volumes. Of course I'll come, she said at once, then turned to the porch where Ella had appeared. Can you manage the children? Yes, ma'am, Ella answered without hesitation. We'll be fine here. I'll see them ready for bed. Within minutes, Callista and Ezekiel were mounted, following Billy into the gathering night. The mine lay several miles past Cedar Ridge, tucked into a narrow canyon where the Morrison family had been pulling silver from the earth these past 5 years. By the time they arrived, the scene blazed with lanterns and frantic activity. Volunteers hurried back and forth, hauling supplies to where Dr. Blackwood had established a makeshift medical station at the mine entrance. 2 injured miners had already been dragged out, one with a broken leg, another bloodied from falling rock, but a third still lay trapped deeper inside, the tunnel too unstable to reach him without risking collapse. Callista, thank heaven you're here, Dr. Blackwood called, her sleeves already rolled, her face streaked with dirt and determination. I need steady hands to help set this leg. The bone's badly displaced, and I can't have someone fainting on me. Without hesitation, Callista stepped forward. She'd faced fevers, injuries, and sleepless nights with children. This, though heavier, was not beyond her. She followed every instruction, holding bone in alignment while the doctor worked, speaking calm words to the groaning man, fetching and arranging supplies so that nothing was out of reach. You're a natural, Dr. Blackwood murmured as they worked. Have you ever considered formal medical training? There's such a need for it here, and you've got instincts that can't be taught. The words planted a seed Callista hadn't known was waiting in her heart. In Boston, the rigid boundaries of society had never allowed her to dream of such a thing. But here, in this rugged land, the idea suddenly seemed possible. Through the long hours of night, Ezekiel joined the team laboring to shore up the tunnel, his engineer's knowledge proving invaluable. Callista remained at the doctor's side, learning more in one sleepless night about frontier medicine than she had in all her life before. By dawn, all 3 miners had been pulled free, wounded, yes, but alive. Dr. Blackwood believed they would recover, though one man faced months of healing. Exhaustion tugged at Callista's body, but exhilaration filled her spirit. You were more than helpful, Dr. Blackwood told her as they packed away the last of the instruments. You were essential. Think about what I said. You've a gift. The ride home was quiet, the first rays of sun spreading gold across the plains. Both she and Ezekiel were lost in thought. Back at the ranch, they found Ella managing the morning with crisp efficiency. The younger children gathered in rapt attention as she spun stories of their parents' heroic night. Will the men be all right? Little Emma asked anxiously as Callista gathered her close. They will, she assured her, kissing her hair. Dr. Hack Blackwood is an excellent doctor, and they're lucky men. Did you save them, Mama Callista? Emily piped up, eyes wide. I helped Dr. Blackwood, she smiled, which means I helped a little, but the true heroes were the men who braved that dangerous mine to bring them out. Over the children's heads, Ezekiel caught her gaze, pride shining in his eyes. That evening, after the household had settled and they collapsed into their own bed, he spoke of what had been turning in both their minds. She's right, you know, he said softly. You have a gift for this work. I saw you tonight, steady and calm when most would have faltered. Would you want to pursue it? Dr. Blackwood could teach you. It was only one night, Callista protested gently. I did as she asked. That's all. It was more than that, he said firmly. The question is whether you want to do more. Her silence stretched, filled with thought. What about the children, this family? I won't give them less of me. The children are growing, Ezekiel reminded her. Ella's nearly grown herself, and the twins are finding their own footing. In a few years, they'll need more guidance than tending, and this skill of yours would serve not just us, but the whole community. It was another turning point, she realized. She had come to Cedar Ridge seeking refuge, and found instead new roads unfolding before her. That night, wrapped in Ezekiel's arms, she understood the truth. The secret that had once driven her from Boston no longer defined her. Here, she was not measured by what she could not give, but cherished for who she was. A wife, a mother, a healer, and a woman whose place in the world had finally opened wide before her. 2 years later, the fruits of that night were plain. Under Dr. Blackwood's careful guidance, Callista had pursued medical training with surprising fervor. 3 afternoons each week, she rode into town, assisting at the clinic, learning to stitch wounds, set bones, and deliver babies. Her aptitude and calm manner made her indispensable. Her patience and clarity, sharpened from years as a teacher, turning her into a true partner in the doctor's work. At home, the family flourished. Ella, now 16, had grown into a capable young woman, now managing the household with ease when Callista was away, and beginning her own work as a teacher under Mrs. Cooper's mentorship. The twins, 12 and restless, had thrown themselves into building and mending under Ezekiel's guidance. Their greatest triumph, a windmill that now watered the garden and livestock. Emily at 10 displayed a rare gift for art, her drawings of ranch life already sought after by visitors from Denver. Little Emma, 7 and bright-eyed, had found her own gift in storytelling, spinning tales that made the family's evenings glow. What had begun as necessity had grown into something enduring and beautiful. What started as strangers bound by circumstance had blossomed into true partnership, love deepening through each trial, each shared triumph. And for Callista, the woman who once fled Boston, carrying a heavy secret, the wide Wyoming sky now stretched above her as home, a place where she was free to become exactly who she was meant to be. Emily's imagination only seemed to grow as she aged, and her memory was as sharp as any scholar's. She entertained the household with sweeping tales about the ranch animals, the towering mountains around them, and the grand adventures she promised to have when she grew. Her younger sister often sat wide-eyed at her side, drinking in every detail of these make-believe kingdoms. Meanwhile, little James, no longer truly little at 4.5, had become the family's delight. He trailed after Ezekiel like a loyal pup, mimicking his every gesture and announcing proudly to anyone who would listen that he would be a rancher, just like his papa. The Warrens had faced their share of trials. The winter of 1891 had been among the worst anyone in Cedar Ridge could remember. Blizzards sealed them off from town for weeks at a time, and the bitter cold claimed half their livestock. Yet even then, Callista had discovered that hardship, when shared with those you loved, was far easier to endure than comfort experienced in loneliness. Not all their losses had been tied to weather. The previous spring, Mrs. Adelaide Crowley, the gentle boarding house owner who had first shown Callista the advertisement that changed her life, had passed peacefully in her sleep. Callista made the journey back to Boston for the funeral, her first return since leaving nearly 4 years before. That trip proved more revealing than she had expected. She walked again through the cobbled streets of Beacon Hill, visited the school where she had once taught, and even called at her parents' stately home. Yet everywhere she turned, she felt like a stranger wandering through someone else's life. The rigid propriety, the narrow expectations for women, the endless performance of civility, it all seemed unbearably small after the wide freedom and purpose she had found in Wyoming. Her parents had greeted her politely, but with an unmistakable distance. Her mother's sharp eye lingered on Callista's sun-darkened hands and her practical dresses, while her father questioned the wisdom of living among savages and criminals so far from civilization. "You could still come home," her mother urged during their last visit. "Charles Paton married last year, but there are other suitable men. Your father could arrange something appropriate." Callista had looked at the woman who bore her, not with anger but with pity. "Mother," she had said gently, "I am home. I've been home nearly 4 years now. I have a husband who loves me, 6 children who need me, and work that gives my life meaning. I have everything I want." And with that, she left Boston behind for good, knowing she would likely never return. The city that had once symbolized everything proper now felt like an elegant prison. Beautiful, yes, but airless and lifeless. Stepping from the train at Cedar Ridge, she had spotted Ezekiel waiting, and the certainty hit her like sunlight. This was where she belonged. The children's arms had flung around her in wild welcome, filling her ears with a flood of chatter about every small happening during her absence. That evening, seated once more at their table with laughter rolling around the room, Callista knew with absolute clarity she was part of something larger than herself. How was Boston? Ezekiel had asked later that night as they readied for bed. Small, she answered simply, much smaller than I remembered. Now, 2 years later, the trip seemed no more than a faint memory. Callista's life brimmed with responsibilities and joys she had once never imagined. Her medical work had grown beyond assisting Dr. Blackwood. She now made house calls to isolated ranches, delivered babies when the doctor was away, and even on rare and desperate occasions, performed emergency surgery herself. When Wyoming's territorial government passed legislation allowing women with proper training and examination to practice medicine, Callista seized the chance. After weeks of intense study and a rigorous examination in Cheyenne, she received her certification as a medical practitioner. Dr. Callista Reed, Ezekiel said proudly when the certificate arrived, savoring the sound of it. I like how that rings. I'm not really a doctor, she protested, embarrassed. I've no degree from a university. You've something better, he insisted. Knowledge earned in real emergencies, compassion shaped through suffering, and skill tested where it matters most. The people here trust you with their lives. If that doesn't make you a doctor, I don't know what does. That recognition opened new doors. She was invited to Denver and Cheyenne to speak at medical conferences, sharing what frontier medicine demanded and how necessity had forged new techniques. She began writing articles for journals, advocating for better opportunities for women in medicine. Yet, despite these professional honors, her greatest joy remained her family, the daily rhythms of growth, triumph, laughter, and even sorrow, all woven into the fabric of a life she loved. One spring evening in 1892, the family gathered on the porch as was their custom, watching the sun slip behind the mountains in a blaze of gold and violet. Callista sat in her rocker, mending one of James's shirts while keeping half an eye on the boy stacking wooden blocks nearby. Ella read aloud from a letter announcing her acceptance to the teacher training college in Denver. Emily, sketchpad in hand, tried to capture the sunset's shifting light. The twins, Michael and Matthew, bent over a chessboard, their competitive energy channeled into thoughtful silence. Little Emma, seated cross-legged at Callista's feet, wove chains of wildflowers while spinning yet another fantastical tale of a princess in the mountains who could speak with animals. Callista, Ezekiel said quietly from the chair beside hers, I've been thinking. She glanced at him over her sewing. About what? It's been 4 years since you answered my advertisement, 4 years since you took a chance on a stranger, and 6 children you'd never met. Do you ever regret it? Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if you'd chosen differently? Callista set her mending aside, startled by the question. Regret it, Ezekiel. These have been the best years of my life. How could I regret finding my family, my home, my purpose, even with all the hardships, the winters, the struggles, the emergencies, especially with them? In Boston, I lived in comfort, but it was an empty kind of comfort. I existed without living. Here, every day matters. Every challenge makes us stronger. Every joy is sweeter because we've earned it together. Ezekiel reached for her hand, his rough fingers threading through hers in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. I love you, Callista Reed, not only for what you've given me and the children, but for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your determination to make the world better. Her heart swelled at his words, familiar warmth rushing through her. And I love you, Ezekiel Warren, all of you, this whole beautiful, chaotic family. Emma, who had been listening despite her flower weaving, looked up seriously. Mama Callista, are you and Papa going to have more babies? Once, the question might have cut deep. Now it only brought a tender smile. No, sweetheart, we already have the perfect number. 6 is just right for us. Good, Emma declared firmly. If you had more, James might have to eat outside with the chickens. Laughter spilled across the porch at this pronouncement. James shot up indignantly from his blocks. I not eat with chickens. Chickens smell funny. As twilight softened into starlight, Callista leaned back in her chair, listening to the sounds of her family. She thought of the desperate woman who had once fled Boston with a secret eating at her heart, willing to settle for mere survival. How strange and miraculous the path had been. She had not found the fanciful romance of her girlhood dreams, but something far greater, a love made strong by respect, responsibility, and the steady choice to stand by one another. Her purpose had not come from giving birth, but from raising children, not from bowing to society's rigid expectations, but from shaping her own. Here, on this patch of Wyoming soil, with the man and children who had become her world, Callista Reed had discovered the life she was meant to live. Callista had discovered that in healing others, she had begun to heal her own wounded spirit. The frontier, with all its hardships and demands, had offered her opportunities to grow and achieve in ways the polished drawing rooms of Boston never could. Most of all, she had learned that what once felt like her greatest weakness could, in truth, become her greatest strength. Her inability to bear children, the very burden that had driven her from her former life in shame, had opened her heart to love fully and without hesitation. She could pour her maternal instincts into Ella, Michael, Matthew, Emily, Emma, and James, every ounce of care, devotion, and tenderness, without fear of holding anything back. Time for bed, everyone, Ella announced in her calm, capable voice, slipping into her role as the eldest. School tomorrow, and Mama Callista has to be at the clinic early. The nightly ritual began, chaotic, noisy, and utterly beautiful. Teeth were brushed, prayers whispered, stories bargained for and told, and small disputes settled with patience. There were hugs, laughter, the tugging of sleeves for just one more, and the inevitable delay tactics that only children could perfect. At last, the house settled, the silence filled only by the soft breathing of 6 sleeping children and the night wind brushing through the pines. Callista and Ezekiel retreated to their room, weary from the day, but content in that bone-deep way that comes from a life fully lived. You know, Callista said as she drew a brush through her hair, her reflection caught in the small mirror above their dresser. Dr. Blackwood mentioned that the Territorial Medical Board is searching for someone to establish a training program for women. They want someone with practical experience, someone who knows both the textbooks and the realities of frontier medicine. Ezekiel, in the midst of hanging up his shirt, turned to face her, already sensing where her thoughts were leading. Are you interested? I think I might be, she admitted softly. It would mean travel, planning courses, examining candidates. But it would also mean equipping women to bring real medical care to isolated families. Just imagine, if every settlement had someone properly trained, how many lives could be spared? His answer was warm and immediate. It sounds exactly like the sort of challenge you'd excel at, and it builds on everything you've already done. Her smile reflected not just gratitude, but a deeper truth. Their marriage had become a true partnership, each supporting the other's hopes and ambitions, each seeing the other's strengths clearly. Later, curled against Ezekiel's side, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat and the gentle rhythm of the house, Callista reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 4 years ago, she had arrived in Cedar Ridge broken and uncertain, carrying secrets and shame, willing to accept a marriage of convenience simply for the shelter it provided. Instead, she had found love. Not the fleeting, romantic sort of her girlhood dreams, but something far greater. A love forged in respect, daily sacrifice, and the shared building of a life. She had discovered purpose in raising children who were not of her blood, but wholly of her heart, and in offering healing where it was most desperately needed. She had learned that family was not bound by biology, but by choice, love, and faithfulness. As sleep overcame her, Callista thought of Ezekiel's quiet prayer so many years ago for a woman who could bring life back into his home. She realized the greater miracle was not simply that she had answered his prayer, but that she had found the answer to her own. 5 years had passed since that fateful day she stepped off the train, and in the Reed household it had become a day of celebration. What once had been filled with nervousness and uncertainty was now marked as a rival day, the day their true family began. The ranch had prospered under Ezekiel and Callista's joint hands. His innovations in ranching and her medical practice had not only stabilized their finances, but expanded their reach. They had purchased neighboring land, broadened their herds, and grown into pillars of the Cedar Ridge community. Callista's reputation as a healer now extended far beyond the town. She had even been appointed to the Wyoming Territorial Medical Board, the first woman in history to hold such a post. Ezekiel, for his part, served on the town council, his leadership instrumental in bringing the railroad spur that finally tied Cedar Ridge directly to Denver. But the truest measure of their success was reflected in the children who had grown under their care. Ella, now 18, had completed her teacher training and stepped into the role of headmistress at the newly founded Cedar Ridge Academy. Her vision extended far beyond simple reading and arithmetic. She dreamed of preparing frontier children for futures every bit as wide as the world itself. Geography should never dictate opportunity, she told her mother, eyes alight with conviction. These children are just as bright as any in Boston or New York. All they need is the chance. Callista's pride in her eldest daughter was boundless. The twins, at 14, had grown into strikingly different young men, despite their shared faces. Michael had inherited Ezekiel's practical mind and spent his time tinkering with ranch equipment. His latest invention, a cattle gate operable from horseback, promised to transform their roundups. Matthew, on the other hand, was drawn to the land itself, his fascination with geology leading him to uncover valuable mineral deposits in their own mountains. Between his rocks and Michael's contraptions, Ezekiel joked one evening, these boys will change the whole frontier. Emily, at 12, had blossomed into the artist Callista had once glimpsed in her sketches. Her landscapes now hung in galleries as far away as Denver, and an art academy in San Francisco had offered her a scholarship. Torn between her ambitions and her love of home, Emily confided to her mother one afternoon in the garden, "I want both things, Mama, to study art, but also to stay here. Is it foolish to love this place so much that leaving feels impossible?" Callista's reply had been gentle but steady. "Home will always be here when you're ready to return." 9-year-old Emma had embraced her gift for storytelling with a passion that surprised even her family. Her first short tale had been published in a Chicago magazine, sparking astonishment in Cedar Ridge and beyond. She had since formed a circle of young writers in town, determined to give other children the courage to share their stories. "Most tales about the frontier are all gunfights and rustlers," she told Callista with a frown of determination. "I want to write about what life here is really like, for families, for mothers, for dreamers." And James, spirited, fearless James, at 5.5, was still the darling of them all. He had just learned to read and tore through books as if they were his next great adventure. His charm, coupled with his utter lack of fear, kept the adults perpetually on edge. After one particularly daring climb, Ezekiel shook his head with exasperation and laughter. "That boy is going to be trouble when he grows up. No sense of limits and enough charm to talk himself out of anything." Callista only smiled knowingly. "Reminds me of another man I once knew, a rancher who thought he could raise 6 children without knowing the first thing about it." The success of their family had not gone unnoticed in the broader community. Callista regularly received letters from women across the territory, asking advice on everything from medical concerns to household management. The story of the mail-order bride who had transformed a grieving household into a thriving family had become something of a legend. These letters inspired Callista's newest project, a comprehensive guide for frontier women, covering topics from basic medical care to child-rearing, household management, and even legal rights. She was collaborating with Dr. Blackwood and other respected women to produce a resource that would be practical, accurate, and encouraging. "Too many women come west feeling unprepared and alone," Callista explained one evening as she worked at her desk. "If we can give them reliable information and remind them they aren't isolated in their struggles, we might prevent some of the tragedies I've seen." The book opened an even greater door, an invitation to speak at the National Women's Conference in Chicago. The organizers wanted Callista to address women's opportunities in the American West. It was recognition she had never dreamed possible. "I never imagined, when I stepped off that train 6 years ago, that anyone would consider me an expert," she mused aloud while preparing her notes. "Back then, I was just a frightened woman running from a life that no longer fit." "You were never just anything," Ezekiel replied firmly. "You've always been someone remarkable. You simply needed the right place to let it show." The trip would be Callista's first major journey away from her family since her return to Boston. The children brimmed with pride over the honor, but were equally anxious about her absence. Plans were laid with military precision to keep the household running smoothly, during her 2-week absence. Ella will manage the daily routines, Callista announced during a family meeting. Your father will handle any emergencies, and Dr. Blackwood will take on my medical responsibilities. What if someone has a baby while you're gone? Emma asked with her usual blunt practicality. Then Dr. Blackwood will deliver it, just as she did before I learned to help, Callista replied with a smile. And if there's any serious emergency, Ella knows how to send a telegram to Chicago. The preparations became a family affair. Emily was designing a special dress for Callista to wear during her speech, using fabric purchased from Denver and a pattern inspired by the wildflowers surrounding the ranch. Ella organized her mother's notes and research. Michael and Matthew constructed a travel trunk with clever compartments for her papers and belongings. Even James contributed, drawing a small picture of the ranch to show people who asked about their home. His artistic ability was unrefined, but the drawing of the house, barn, and family was both recognizable and deeply touching. The night before her departure, the family gathered for a special supper filled with everyone's favorite dishes. Laughter and affectionate teasing flowed freely as they spoke of Callista's upcoming speech, mingled with words of pride in her accomplishments. Remember, Callista said as the evening drew to a close, whatever recognition I receive in Chicago belongs to all of us. Everything I've done has been possible only because of this family's love and support. And we want you to remember, Ezekiel answered, that you've given us far more than we ever gave you. You saved this family, Callista. You turned 6 grieving children and 1 overwhelmed man into something strong and beautiful. That night, as Callista tucked each child into bed, she reflected on how far they had all come. Ella was no longer simply the eldest daughter. She was a confidant and partner in running the household. The twins had matured from mischievous boys into capable young men with real ambitions. Emily was blossoming into a true artist. Emma had found her voice as a storyteller, and James remained the household's ray of sunshine. Her bond with Ezekiel had deepened into something far richer than the practical arrangement they had once agreed upon. Together, they had built not just a home, but a love story grounded in respect, shared burdens, and the daily choice to cherish one another. As she settled into bed beside him, Callista thought of the words she planned to speak in Chicago. She would talk of opportunities the West offered, but also of its challenges and the essential role of community. The frontier doesn't automatically liberate women, she had written in her notes, but it does give space for those brave enough to define their own roles and create their own opportunities. Success requires not just individual courage, but the support of family and community. Tomorrow she would step onto the train bound for Chicago and national recognition. But tonight, as she lay in the quiet of their Wyoming home, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping children and the steady warmth of her husband, Callista knew her greatest accomplishment was here. Whatever triumphs awaited her on the national stage, nothing would ever surpass the miracle of this family. The mail-order bride who once carried a secret that nearly destroyed her future was now carrying a message of hope and possibility to women across the nation. Her journey, which began in desperation, had become one of triumph. And though her travels would take her far, the destination that mattered most would always remain the same, Cedar Ridge, where her family waited and where her heart truly belonged. Callista stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of Chicago's Palmer House Hotel, looking out at nearly 300 women, educators, physicians, reformers, and pioneers from across the nation. Just 6 years earlier, she had been a broken woman fleeing Boston in shame, believing her inability to bear children rendered her worthless. Now, she stood before the National Women's Conference as a recognized authority on frontier medicine and women's opportunities in the developing West. Ladies, she began, her voice carrying through the ornate hall, when I stepped off a train in Cedar Ridge, Wyoming 6 years ago, I believed I was going to the end of the world. I thought I was settling for a life of isolation and limitation. Instead, I found that the frontier offers something precious to those willing to embrace it, the chance to define ourselves by what we can do, rather than by what we cannot. The room grew still as Callista spoke. She shared openly about her medical condition, the stigma it had brought her in Boston, and the desperate choice to become a mail order bride. But she focused on what followed: the discovery of her gift as a healer, the joy of raising 6 children who were hers in every way that mattered, and her journey into a profession serving an entire territory. The West did not change who I was, she told them. It simply gave me the space to become who I was meant to be. In Eastern society, a woman like me, barren, unmarried, dismissed as damaged goods, had no place. But on the frontier, usefulness matters more than conformity. Skill matters more than scandal. Contribution matters more than convention. She spoke of the challenges: isolation, harsh conditions, scarce resources, and medical emergencies without proper care. But she also painted the opportunities: working as true partners alongside their husbands, developing skills out of necessity that became vocations, and shaping communities where women's contributions were indispensable. In Wyoming Territory, women have had the right to vote for over 20 years. Callista reminded them, drawing murmurs of admiration. We serve on juries, own property in our names, and practice professions closed to women in many eastern states. This isn't because men here are more enlightened. It is because survival on the frontier requires the full participation of every hand. The speech was interrupted several times by spontaneous applause, especially when she described training other women in medical techniques and advocating for professional education. When she finished, the audience rose to a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. During the question period that followed, women asked her about medical procedures, advice on homesteading, and the realities of frontier life. The family's success had not gone unnoticed beyond Cedar Ridge. Letters arrived almost weekly, addressed to Callista from women scattered across the territory. They came seeking counsel on everything from childbirth to managing a household alone on the frontier. The tale of the mail-order bride who had turned sorrow into stability and then into triumph had grown into legend. Those letters planted the seed for her latest undertaking, a guide for frontier women, filled with practical knowledge on medicine, child-rearing, household order, and even legal rights. She worked late into the evenings with Dr. Blackwood and several respected women of the territory, determined to create something that would steady and encourage others who felt as she once had, isolated, unprepared, and frightened. One too many women step off the train with nothing but fear in their hearts, Callista confided to Ezekiel one night, her hands ink-stained from writing. If we can give them truth and comfort before hardship comes, perhaps we can prevent some of the tragedies I've witnessed. Her project soon led to something larger than she had dared imagine, an invitation to speak at the National Women's Conference in Chicago. They wanted her, Callista Reed, to share her perspective on opportunity for women in the West. When the letter arrived, she had read it 3 times before believing it to be real. I never thought, she murmured while drafting her remarks, that stepping off a train 6 years ago would ever make me an expert. I was nothing but a frightened woman escaping a life that no longer fit. You were never just anything, Ezekiel answered, setting his work aside to meet her gaze. You only needed the right soil for your roots to grow. The thought of leaving for 2 weeks filled the children with both pride and worry. Callista gathered them around the table to carefully map out who would keep the household running. Ella will oversee the routines, she explained. Your father will handle emergencies, and Dr. Blackwood has agreed to cover my medical work. But what if someone has a baby? Emma asked with wide, practical eyes. Then Dr. Blackwood will deliver it, just as she did before I learned how. And if anything truly dire occurs, as how to send a telegram. Preparations became a family affair. Emily designed a special gown for Callista, its fabric brought from Denver and stitched with a pattern of wildflowers from the ranch. Ella helped organize pages of notes. The twins, inventive as ever, built a traveling trunk with clever compartments. James presented a simple sketch of their ranch, barn, house, and figures standing in front, that he insisted she show to people who asked about her home. On the eve of her departure, they shared a feast of favorite dishes. Laughter mixed with teasing about her coming fame, though beneath the playfulness shone an unmistakable pride. Remember, Callista told them when the evening grew still, whatever honor I receive belongs to us all. I've done nothing alone. And don't forget, Ezekiel countered gently, that you saved us first. You gave 6 grieving children and a weary man a reason to breathe again. You turned us into something whole. Later, as she tucked each child into bed, Callista marveled at the changes time had wrought. Ella was no longer just her eldest daughter, but her confidant and trusted partner. The twins spoke of irrigation plans with the seriousness of grown men. Emily's art blossomed with promise, Emma's pen filled whole notebooks with stories, and James, with his bright smile, remained the sunshine of the household. Beside Ezekiel, she felt the weight of the journey they had walked together. What began as a contract between strangers had become the kind of love story only forged in truth, respect, and shared labor. When she finally settled into bed, her thoughts drifted to the speech she would deliver. She would tell those women in Chicago that the West was not a magic cure for oppression, but it was a place where women could carve new roles if they were willing to work and if they found the strength of community. The frontier does not free women by itself, she had written, but it gives space to those brave enough to step into it. Courage, yes, but also community, that is what sustains us. Morning came, and with it the train. Days later, she stood at the polished podium of Chicago's Palmer House Hotel, facing nearly 300 women, teachers, reformers, physicians, pioneers. 6 years earlier, she had fled Boston in shame, barren, and convinced of her worthlessness. Now she was Dr. Callista Reed, healer, mother, and pioneer. Ladies, she began, her voice carrying through the grand ballroom, when I first arrived in Cedar Ridge, I thought I was going to the end of the world. What I found instead was the chance to define myself not by what I could not do, but by what I could. She spoke of her condition, the shame it once brought, and the choice to marry a stranger. She told of the children she had raised, the lives she had mended, the work she had discovered. The West did not change who I was, she declared. It simply gave me space to become her. In the East, a barren woman is marked as useless. In the West, what matters is skill. What matters is the willingness to contribute. Spontaneous applause broke through her words more than once, especially when she spoke of teaching other women medical skills and urging more education for women in every profession. She spoke of the hardships, the loneliness, the brutal winters, the scarcity of resources, but also the profound opportunities. Wyoming women, she reminded them, vote, own property, sit on juries, not because our men are unusually enlightened, but because frontier life demands the effort of every hand. During the questions that followed, one struck her deepest. Do you have advice? A young woman asked softly. For those of us who cannot bear children, yet long to be mothers? Callista's heart caught, remembering her own anguish years ago. Motherhood is not only pregnancy and birth, she answered. It is love and the choice to nurture. Children come to us through adoption, through teaching, through marriage. Biology is but one door into a much larger home. The room filled with quiet tears and nods. For 3 days, she joined conversations on suffrage, education, reform, and medicine. The women she met left her humbled and inspired. Yet when evening came, the brilliance of Chicago paled next to the ache of longing for home. On her final night, a telegram arrived. Mama Callista, stop. Emily won first prize, stop. Emma published again, stop. James lost 2 teeth, stop. Missing you terribly, stop. Love Ezekiel and children, stop. Her eyes filled. Recognition was sweet, but the words reminded her what mattered most. The train ride home seemed endless. She filled it with notes for her book, yet nothing compared to the sight of Cedar Ridge rising against the mountains. At the station, Ezekiel stood waiting with all 6 children, their eager faces lit with joy. How was it, being famous? Emma asked as they piled into the wagon. Interesting, Callista replied honestly, but not nearly as wonderful as being home. That night at the family table, she recounted the conference. Yet as she spoke of the extraordinary women she had met, she realized something truer still. The greatest revolution, she told them, is not fought in parlors or podiums. It is in how we love each other and in raising children to carry that love forward. Later, walking the quiet halls, she paused at each room. Ella bent over her lessons by lamplight, murmuring thanks for the example Callista had set. The twins debated irrigation plans, full of restless energy. Emily displayed paintings with growing mastery. Emma read aloud story ideas. James proudly showed her his crooked signature. Each one bore witness to the life she had built. Finally, she stepped onto the balcony beside Ezekiel. The night spread out over their land, filled with the lowing of cattle and the call of a distant owl. Any regrets? He teased gently. None, she answered with certainty. Chicago was remarkable, but this is where I belong. As she settled into his arms, listening to the soft breaths of her sleeping children, Callista thought of the woman who had once stepped off a train carrying only shame and fear. That woman had found instead love, purpose, and belonging. What she once believed was weakness had become her strength. Her barrenness had freed her to love without measure, to heal without restraint, to create a family by choice rather than blood. She drifted to sleep certain of one truth. The world might remember Dr. Callista Reed, speaker and reformer, but her greatest legacy would always be the simple miracle of family, the daily choosing of one another in the quiet sanctuary of home.
Here on Wild Mercy, we don't just tell tales, we bring forgotten hearts back to life. Love that defies distance, war, and fate. Hit that like button to keep these stories riding strong. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss another heartfelt romance. A story of resilience and where love always finds a way home.